Nick, did the NDP walk into a trap with this Liberal deal, which will see the Liberals govern with NDP support until 2025?
Well, Jagmeet Singh has put his political future on the line with this agreement, this parliamentary agreement that the New Democrats have with the Liberals. Let's face it, if everything goes well from a New Democrat perspective, they'll be able to put some wins in the window between now and 2025. However, and this is the political killer, potential political killer, if the Liberals hit a controversy, if there is a scandal, if there is turbulence, and the New Democrats are propping up the Liberals, they're going to be a prime target for Canadians that are frustrated. And I think Jagmeet Singh, his leadership could be on the line, because there'll probably be, if there is any kind of Liberal controversy or scandal and the NDP have to hold their nose and prop up the government, there'll be NDP caucus members that will be very upset, and they'll probably looking to blame Jagmeet Singh. So big risk for Jagmeet Singh. There is a reward on the policy front, but I think it's a significant political risk for him, especially if the Liberals hit any kind of controversy between now and 2025. And how about this for a prediction? Will there be a scandal or controversy between now and 2025? Yes, there will be.
Yeah.
So he's got to be ready for how he's going to manage the political heat if it looks like the New Democrats are propping up a Liberal government that is back on its heels.
Yeah, like in the actual agreement, it hinges on no surprises, and how do you? I mean, obviously they mean no legislative surprises, but in the wider context, how do you prevent any kind of scandal that the NDP will then have to defend from happening?
You can't. It's as simple as that. They won't be able to do that, and I think that's why I think this is probably it is a risk. There's a reward, but there's also a risk for Jagmeet Singh, because caucus members will be pinning it on him. The fact that they have this agreement, this parliamentary agreement, and that it could be risky. And let's face it, New Democrat voters will be upset if and when this occurs sometime between now and 2025.
So, Nick, on this podcast, on Trendline, you've said repeatedly that the Liberals have sort of drifted left, and they've left open a big, wide open space in the middle of Canada's political landscape for a potentially, let's say, progressive conservative to swoop in and take middle voters. So where does this leave the Conservatives? And do you think they'll take advantage of this?
Well, whether they'll take advantage of it or not, it's hard to see. But the thing is, first of all, we have to say, Michael, there are probably card-carrying Liberals and Liberal voters who are clutching their chest or started to clutch their chest as soon as they started to hear, it's not a coalition, but started to hear about this confidence and supply arrangement to prop up the Liberals, because this is the next step. Think of it this way. Back in 2015, the Liberals did tilt to the progressive side of the equation in order to pick up those NDP voters and to be that big popular progressive front. But now they've put pen to paper to have an agreement, and has firmly anchored this current iteration of the Liberal Party under Justin Trudeau on the progressive side. So there are probably some blue Liberals who feel abandoned, but there are Canadians that are probably more pragmatic. So for the Conservatives, the big question is, where do they go? Do they go to the right? Do they say the center right? Do they move to the center? In polling that we've just recently done, where we asked Canadians about the path forward for the Conservative Party and which way they should potentially tilt. And this was a survey that we did for Power Play, CTV's Power Play. 30% of Canadians said, you know what, doesn't matter which direction that the Conservatives go in, they'll never, ever, 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 ever vote for the Conservatives. 29% of Canadians, and this was the most popular choice, said they'd like to see the progressives become, the Conservatives, that is, become progressive on social issues and more centrist on economic issues. The third most popular response was that they should become more socially progressive and then right-wing on economic issues. So it looks like average Canadians would like to see the Conservative Party not be at the center, but move closer to the center to take up some of that space. But Michael, who knows what's going to happen, because there's a leadership at play. And average Canadians are not necessarily Conservative voters. So there's a different group of people that will be selecting the next leader of the Conservative Party of Canada.
Yeah, so potential voters are one thing, but it's the party themselves who decides the next leader. So we have a race right now between, I guess, Jean Charest, progressive conservative, and representing the more, I suppose, right-wing elements of the party, Pierre Poilievre. You've also done some polling on who's leading that race right now.
I think you have to be. I know you refer to Jean Charest as a progressive conservative, and he was a progressive conservative, as were all conservatives were. I don't know, 30 years ago, progressive conservatives. I'm not sure if he'd like you to call him a progressive conservative.
Conservative, sorry.
This guy doesn't even want to say that he was a liberal.
That's right.
Like, you remember in Harry Potter, like Voldemort?
Yeah.
The man whose name must not be spoken. Like, it's like Jean Charest, it's kind of like liberal, the party whose name he will not speak of. Because, he's firmly trying to kind of capture the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada. But the fact of the matter is, he's a former Quebec Liberal premier, and the Liberal Party in Quebec is different than Liberals in other parts of the country. But still, he's there, and he's still seen as being more progressive, especially compared to some of the other leadership contenders. But, in that survey of Canadians, not Conservative Party members, but of Canadians, it showed that when we asked them, and this was a survey for the Globe and Mail, who they thought had the best chance of winning the next election, Charest came out on top at 30%, 24% said that they didn't know. Pierre Poilievre came in at 22%, and then we had the rest in with low numbers. So ask average Canadians, they believe that Jean Charest has a marginal advantage over Pierre Poilievre on the winnability front. But like I said before, these are not Conservative members. The big hurdle is, what do Conservative Party members want on the future of the Conservative Party? And do they want to stay the course where Conservatives are right now ideologically, or do they want to tilt a little bit to the center? And we got to remember, I'll call it the ghost of Aaron O'Toole, right? Here's a guy that during the election went to move a little more towards the center, and his caucus not very happy about that. So it's going to be interesting to see what actually happens and where the Conservatives want to take things.
Nick, over in Alberta, it seems like the United Conservative Party there might not be as united after all, according to Premier Jason Kenney's comments that were caught on tape. I'm just really fascinated by what's going on there. So Jason Kenney was caught talking to staffers about how he's got a leadership review coming up, in the coming weeks, and he was pondering just sort of walking away, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he basically said that he might just go to the private sector because at least he would get weekends and evenings off, which NDP. Former Alberta Premier Rachel Notley, NDP Premier, responded to, saying she would never quit the people of Alberta. Anyways, his comments really cause a backlash.
Yeah, why don't we say congratulations, Jason Kenney and the United Conservative Party, on being now the official Game of Thrones variation of politics in Canada. Like, you talked about a staffer recorded this and obviously released this. This isn't, hypothetically, I don't think that's supposed to be a hostile person, but I'm not sure who thought that recording this would help Jason Kenney and his bid through the leadership process. And maybe we should just say, if someone is in a meeting with you and they're recording it and not telling you, perhaps they're not your friend. So, the reality is it looks like there is just turbulence and a lot of backroom maneuvering that's going on right now on the leadership. We know that Jason Kenney has staked out 50% plus one vote to stay on. We don't know whether that will actually be accepted by the caucus or the party or the province. But what it speaks to is the machinations of Alberta Conservative politics. Do you know what? Alberta Conservatives, they're true blue, but they are a tough crowd to navigate in and to survive. And Jason Kenney is getting a firsthand look at how difficult it is to lead the Conservative movement in, why don't we just say, Canada's most conservative province.
So in the wider context of these comments, Jason Kenney also said the reason why he decided to stay on and fight with this leadership review is because he was worried that the more I guess extreme elements of the party would take over, and he sees himself as the mainstream conservative. So it's kind of a strange echo of what's happening federally right now.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I think for a number of conservatives, it's probably interesting to see Jason Kenney frame himself as a moderate conservative, because I think for looking at his track record, I think he's obviously a conservative economically, but also a conservative from a social perspective, that he was considered a social conservative because of his views on a lot of social issues were conservative. And this would be the equivalent of Jason Kenney kind of pointing fingers to other people within his own party that he is the leader of, saying that he's trying to keep the party relevant. But the problem is that as soon as he does something like that, he not only elevates those other views, he probably emboldens them to organize even more. Perhaps it's a strategy for him, knowing his belief that he will win the leadership review, remain as leader, and wants to cast himself as a little more of a moderate conservative when he's up against Rachel Notley, who's definitely on the progressive side of the ledger. So, but this is back to like Game of Thrones in terms of the almost Byzantine-like politics and positioning that's going on within the conservative movement in Alberta on a provincial level.
Nick, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to look at how NATO allies are boosting their defense budgets to meet their NATO obligations, and how Canadians feel about our government doing the same. Nick, so with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, NATO seems more important than it's been in a long time. Canada's NATO allies are thinking about raising their defense budgets to meet their NATO targets. How does Canada fit in with this, and what are we seeing with our European allies so far?
Well, we still got that Trump thing. If you remember, Michael, what did Trump? I don't think he called Canada didn't call Canada freeloaders, but I think he kind of said it's kind of like being in a meeting. Yeah, Donald Trump being at like the NATO meeting, going, there are some freeloaders at this meeting who are not spending. We're carrying, the America is carrying the freight.
I think he said we're mildly delinquent or something like that. Mildly delinquent, maybe. But
yeah, maybe he said that, but I think he thought freeloaders, because that's the way Trump thinks. Mm-hmm. But the thing is that all NATO allies, there is a target of 2% of GDP. Canada has not come close to meeting that target. I think it's at 1.4 or something like that.
Yeah, 1.39% right now.
Yeah, so at 1.39, that means, and we'll do some quick math, that Canada would have to increase defense spending by 50%, like another 7.7, in order to meet its NATO target. That's a big jump, and the government has been investing, and maybe it hasn't been investing enough for some Canadians, but it has been investing in the Canadian Armed Forces. What's interesting is that we did a survey on defense spending compared to social spending, and I think this is what's important, because this isn't just about what's happening in Ukraine and what might be the requirements from a NATO commitment perspective, but when we asked Canadians on choices, on spending more money on defense, for example, to deal with threats like the war in Ukraine, or dealing with spending more on social issues to deal with the outcome of the pandemic, Canadians were more likely to support defense spending. 45% said they'd like to see more spending on defense. 39% said they'd like to see more spending on social issues. And I think what this speaks to is that I'll say a full throttle movement to 2% of GDP is not necessarily supported by a majority of Canadians. That Canadians are divided. They understand that there's still a lot of social programs and other supports that Canadians need just to survive and get through this pandemic from an economic perspective. However, the war that we're seeing now between Ukraine and Russia has put a spotlight on defense spending. And I would say, that 45% still pretty significant. 45% of Canadians wanting to see money spent on defense over social programs at this particular point in time.
So meeting our target of 2% would be billions of dollars more per year that we're already spending. Already, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh has called that an arbitrary target, and I'm going back to the start of the show where we talked about the Liberal NDP deal. Are we seeing trouble there ahead already if the Liberals move to raise spending?
Well, for sure. And the thing is for the NDP, what are they going to do? You notice there's a pause. There's nothing that they could do. That they've got it. As long as the Liberals deliver on the things that they promised to deliver on, the reality is that the New Democrats can oppose and criticize, but as long as it's not a confidence motion and not part of the budget or any kind of supply vote, then the NDP can register their dissent and move forward. But the other interesting thing about this, Michael, is that some of our other NATO allies, and why don't we talk about Germany for a second, have had a change of heart. The current government in Germany is the Social Democrats, Greens, and the Liberals. In Germany, it's a progressive left-wing government, and they came out and said that they would meet their 2% target for defense spending. This represents a significant game changer for Germany and German policy. And, it's going to be interesting to see. That's a progressive government that has made a commitment to go straight to 2%. And I think it's going to be interesting to see. Canada will be, regardless of the domestic political situation, Canada will be compared against all of its other NATO allies and partners on defense spending. And I would hazard to say, if I could make a prediction, that, for Canadians on a lot of these issues, they don't want us to spend the most and they don't want us to spend the least. It's kind of like Goldilocks. They want us to be in the middle of the pack. But we should not be the laggard in NATO in terms of the lowest spend on GDP lowest spend on defense from a GDP perspective, but they don't want us to be at the top. So it's going to be interesting to see how other NATO allies like Germany, where they play this out, and how Canada fits in the pecking order within NATO on defense spending.
Nick, as always, thanks very much for your insights. And I think we'll leave it there for this show.
Super.